PC floppy disk is capacity, high speed, long-term storage device in our PC system, and that is the hard disk drive. We're going to take a look at how a hard disk drive works and look at how we install it in our system. Now,
quite a bit more expensive, so a lot faster than IDE, hence the popularity. Now, another factor you need to keep in mind with your hard disk drive, in addition to interface, is capacity. Storage space do you need? I would recommend a bare minimum of 40 gigabytes. And you know, if you have the money, spend it and get a really big hard drive. No matter how big your hard disk is, you always end up using every last bit of it. Another thing you want to keep in mind is how fast does that hard drive spin. The faster the hard drive spins, the faster it can read and write data. Low-end hard drives run at about 5,000 RPMs. Middle of the line hard drives run at about 700. These are really nice. These are much snappier than the. I would set this as my bare minimum. And then if you really want to spend some money, you can get a 10,000 RPM hard disk drive. Once again, you're just increasing the performance of the system. Now, to install an IDE/ATA type, there's a concept you've got to know. Channel, master, and slave. Let's first talk channels. What you need to understand is that your motherboard has two IDE channels installed, two different connectors. The one is the primary and the other is the secondary. To each of these connectors we have two plugs on it, meaning that our PC system maximum or IDE devices in the system. When I say IDE, I'm talking about IDE ATA. On channel, there has to be a master drive and a slave drive. It's politically incorrect, but that's what they're called. Each channel has one master and one slave. Okay? You cannot have two drives on the same channel. You cannot have two master drives on the same channel. One drive is the master, the other drive is the slave. Now, you might be asking the question, well, what if I only have one drive in the system? Well, in that case, we just install it as the first drive on the primary controller, and we set it to be a master. Now, here's another point of confusion. Many hard drives will have actually, instead of having master and slave, they'll have a third one called single. So we can set it to be a master drive, slave drive. On those types of drives, if there's only one drive in the system, instead of setting it to master, we set it to single. Other drives that don't have the single, if there's only one drive on the channel, you set it to be the master. Let's go and install the hard disk drive for the system we're building as the master drive on the primary IDE channel. First thing we need in an IDE/ATA type hard disk drive is set the master-slave relationship on the hard drive itself. And this is done using jumpers. Now, most good hard disk drives will have a legend on them somewhere that tells you how to set the drive in a given way. Take a look at this hard disk drive. It gives us a legend here. It tells us how to set the drive as a master drive. It says if we want the drive to be a master, then we need to put a jumper on the jumper labeled DS. Let's go ahead and do that. Now, remember from the table that the jumpers on the far right side is the DS jumper. If we want to set this drive to be a master drive, then we need to place a shunt, such as this one here in my fingers, on that far right set of pins, like this. By doing that, I just set that drive to be the master drive. Now we can install that drive on either our primary or our secondary IDE channels on the motherboard. However, the general rule of thumb is that you set the main hard disk drive in the system to be the master drive on the primary IDE. That's what we're going to do next. With our drive, master drive, the next thing we need to do actually physically install the drive in a 3.5-inch drive bay in our case. Now, here's our floppy disk drive. There's actually a second floppy disk drive bay right here, and then there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hard disk bays right here. So my hard disk drive, I'm going to move the floppy disk cable out of the way. I'm going to install it in this or this first hard disk bay right here. There's some little tabs that the hard drive rests on. Slide it in, and you just want to line up the hole in the hard disk drive, holes in the case, and get 2 coarse threaded screws. Now I need to put 2 screws in. Okay, I've got the front and the back holding the hard drive into the case. Now I need to connect my hard disk drive to my IDE pieces on the motherboard. I have 2 of them. I have a black one and I have the blue is our primary channel. Black connector is our... Now, this brings up a very important point. I have 2 IDE cables here. I have this one, and I also this one. They both have identical plugs. Which one should I use? Are they? Well, if you look very carefully, your left has fewer wires than the one on the right. This cable over here is designed for old IDE drives. It only has 40 wires. The cable here on the right actually has 80 wires, and for newer IDE/A type drives. If your builder has purchased a newer hard disk drive, make sure that you're using this newer type of cable and not this older one. The first thing I need to connect my IDE to my primary IDE connector on the motherboard. Now notice that this connector is keyed. Back in the old days of IDE, really easy to put the cable on where it's become a key to keep you from doing so. Also notice that there's a pin missing right here. Okay, there's a little gold pin. These 2 key and that missing pin keep you from installing your IDE cable backwards. So I take my ribbon cable and I find it, and I line up the notch. See the key on the ribbon cable needs to with the hole, the notch in the motherboard connector, and then I just simply push it. Let's go ahead and connect the other end to our IDE hard disk drive. Okay, so the other end of our cable, and we plug it to the connector on the back of the IDE drive right here. Now, just like the other one, it's pin missing. This is the connector, and it's keyed as well. So we can't put it in backwards. Now, the question I get time. There's actually 2 different connectors on the IDE cable. We can have a slave drive, right? The connector is plugged into the master drive. The connector is plugged into this. You know what? It doesn't matter. The master-slave relationship is by this jumper. It's not controlled by the position. I'm going to plug my IDE ribbon cable in until I fill it firmly down the bottom. Now there's one more task. Notice right here that there's a power. In order for this hard drive to work, it's got to have current power supply. It's got electric motors that got to run. In order, we pick one of our large connectors, such as this one. The Molex connector is beveled so that it can only be inserted in direction. Look at the connector in there and find the correct, and then simply push it on. Now our IDE hard disk is properly. There is one more thing we need to do before we can use it. Let's go into our setup program and configure our BIOS with the appropriate parameters of the hard disk drive. We're not going to do that yet. We're going to do it in one fell swoop. We'll set our floppy disks and everything else all at once. Our hard disk drive installed, the next thing we need to do to build our is install an optical media drive. Now many people's heads when I say the term optical media drive, they say, what in the heck? Optical media drive? What are you talking? Well, an optical drive is a fancy name for either a CD drive or a DVD drive. Let's talk about how an optical media works next.
Now, an optical drive is binary PC data on the surface of an optical disc, a CD or a DVD. On the bottom side of any CD or DVD are areas of the disc that reflect light and areas of the disc that don't. By using reflections and non-reflections, we can encode binary zeros. In order to read this information off of a disc, a head inside our optical drive that shoots a laser beam at the bottom of the disc. Now, some areas of the disc reflect, 0. Some areas of the disc do reflect, a 1. The reflection comes back looking like this, a series of dashes and blanks. The head inside the optical drive reads those reflections and reconstructs binary PC data from it. With that, let's take a look at the considerations you need to keep in mind when selecting an op for your system. The first choice, obviously, that you're going to have to make is, do I want a CD or do I want a DVD? The CDs only hold 680 or so megabytes of data. A DVD drive, on the other hand, can hold a lot of information, 4.8 gigabytes of data. If you decide to go with a CD, you also need to what type of CD, because there's actually several. The first type is called a CD-ROM. This is the earliest type of CD optical media drive, and ROM stands for read-only memory. It could only read discs. It couldn't read discs. If you wanted a writer, then you need to look at one of two other options. One was called a CDR. This was the first type CD burner. Well, one of the problems with the CDR is the fact that once you wrote data to a disk, it was fixed on the disk. Nothing you could do if you wanted to change it. To address this limitation, the industry came up with the CDRW drive. The CDR drive can read a typical CD-ROM drive, write to a CDR disk, and it can also, with a CDU disk in the CDRW drive, actually write data to the disk, erase it, whatever you want it to do. Just like with a CD, if you're going to pick a DVD drive, you need to pick a type. And there are many types. The first, of course, is the DVD-ROM, which is like a CD-ROM. It's just it can only read data, it can't write. If you wanted a recordable DVD, however, you had a plethora of choices. The first one was the DVD-R, DVD recordable. Later on came the DVD-RW. Like a CD, you can burn information, erase it, rewrite information, and so on. Enhancements were made, and you had the DVD plus RW. In the last couple of years, we've seen DVD plus minus RW drives that allow either type of disk to be read or written to. With that, let's take a look at how we install a DVD in our PC building. Now, for them, I like with an IDE drive. Because it's an IDE drive, I have to set the master-slave relationship. We're going to make this the master drive on the secondary IDE channel. So the first thing we need to do is to set our master-slave relationship. That is done with this set of jumpers right here. This set of jumpers is slave, this set of jumpers is the master. Notice that it's already set to be the master drive. There is one other connector you need to be aware of, and this is this one right here. This is our analog audio connector. We're going to put a plug in here and connect it to our motherboard. What that allows us to do is to put a traditional audio CD in our CD drive and play that audio CD and have the music come out through our PC system speakers without really having to do much with the CPU. So let's go ahead and put this drive in the system. Now, what I need to do actually is remove a front cover from the case itself. You'll find that with the given case you might have 1, 2, maybe even 4 different slot covers that cover up each of these 5 1/4 inch drive bays. And again, depending on the type of case you pick, there may actually be a metal plate cover right there behind the plastic plate cover, and you might take that off too. If you find one of those, just grab a hold of a screwdriver or a pair of pliers and wiggle it till it comes loose. Then pop off the plastic cover and we're ready to put the drive in. Now, I've already done that on this system. So I'm going to take my drive, and I found with CD drives it's usually easier to insert them from the than from the rear because they're so long. And I've selected this bottom 5 1/4 inch drive bay to insert the drive into. As we did with the floppy disk drive, I've got one hand over here with my thumb